I was alive, I might have been a little naughty. But after they killed me, I became something much, much worse. The stuff nightmares are made of. The children still feared me, and their fear gave me the power to invade their dreams. And that's when the fun really began. Until they figured out a way to forget about me, to erase me completely. I can't come back if nobody remembers me. I can't come back if nobody's afraid. I had to search the bowels of hell, but I found someone who'll make them remember. He may get the blood, but I'll get the glory, and that fear is my ticket home.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks?
You're listening to The Fear of God, a podcast exploring the intersection between Christianity and the horror genre.
Hello and welcome to episode 102 of The Fear of God. It's a whole new 100-episode block. We're in a new era. We are entering into the next chapter, the next phase, as it were. You are listening to a show that blends Christian faith and explorations in that general area with the horror genre. And for 101 episodes now, you have been hearing from one Mr. Reed Lackey and one Mr. Nathan Rouse. But as you know, I have multiple times now eradicated one Mr. Nathan Rouse in these little openings. And I just didn't know how we were going to be able to continue the show doing this. So there's been all this antagonism. I would kill him off. You know, he would just send me on some little adventure, but I would kill him off to whenever I would open the show. So I finally decided, after all this time, that I'm going to dig him up and bring him back. So hopefully there won't be any more battles. Hopefully there won't be any more conflict moving forward. I dug up his rotted corpse that I had decimated in the Purge. I dug up his decayed body from the Final Destination episode. I have now brought him back. In fact, he's here right now. Nathan, how you doing?
Reed, my friend. I'm good. I mean, I don't know what Jason, Jason, what? Jason. Oh, I can't even conjure Arnold right now. Do you like that? Like, it's gone. Arnold's gone. He has left the building.
Oh my gosh.
Woo! 101. I am still recovering from 101. That was one monster party.
Oh my gosh.
And man, I almost didn't make it to this one, but I appreciate you getting out the defibrillator and just, putting it on my chest, and here I am. So I thought, Reed, that you were heading for a showdown between you and I. Like, it's going to be RVN, right?
RVN. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Hashtag RVN. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So ladies and gentlemen, we're here. You're here. We're so glad. We're excited that you guys are here. We're going to dive right into some stuff now. But if you have not done so, then please, we would urge you to go to iTunes, leave us a rating, leave us a review. And I'm excited about this episode. I'm excited for what's next.
Reed, I want to give you some public props, brother. Like, I didn't know know exactly how 101 would land when we were recording it. I was like, there's a lot of green screen happening. There's a lot of motion capture going on. Like, I just didn't know how it would look in the final production. And you outdid yourself.
Well, thank you very much.
I drew a lot of joy from the walk down memory lane, and it would seem that our listeners took some fun out of that too. So thank you guys so much for, being along this crazy journey. And yes, as Reed mentioned, we are jumping into a new series today, a semi-brief series. But before we get there, Reed, I just got to know what you watching, what you reading,
Yeah.
what you listening to. Wow.
No. So I was actually, I know you were very excited about this. I think you're a little bit further ahead than I am, but we've.
Are you calling me old?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm calling you much older than I am. So no, I know that we're, watching it together. We've tagged in on it a couple of times, but I felt the need and the compulsion, and if you want to join in on this, to bring up Castle Rock again.
I want to do it. Can I throw 2 cents in the pool before you do this?
Yeah, yeah. Go right ahead.
Because I will say this for Castle Rock, like, it's hard to say. I would be mildly interested in a total rewatch. As of this recording, 8 episodes are out. You've watched 7, right?
I've only seen up through episode 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would totally want to do a rewatch, because I do think some of those early episodes are super slow and kind of, but as 7 indicates, there's layers upon layers, time is a face on the water. Thank you, side. Mm-hmm. But I will say this. I'm eating crow, which is also a Castle Rock reference, not the eating of them, but the showing up of them. Episode 4, I think it was 4, had a deft turn in the latter part of it. So for anyone watching, this is the Hulu Stephen King inspired show. Episode 4 has a really great final 15-20 minutes that are really gripping. 5 is interesting. 6 is pretty good. 7 is amazing. And I don't know that I've had as strong a pivot from relative ambivalence. Like, I was on board because it was good, and I would have said, yeah, I'd give this kind of a 3 out of 5 sort of thing.
Right.
But the Sissy Spacek centered, say that 3 times fast, episode titled The Queen, my goodness, what a tour de force and a monstrous episode.
It was staggering. And here's the thing that I really responded to is it feels somewhat complete of itself. Like, I get the feeling, and this would be hard to test out or prove out, I get the feeling that if you just dropped somebody in who had not watched the rest of this show, but you showed them that episode, I have a feeling that they would still find it very emotional and compelling. Not even really sure what all of the threads lingered out to. Now, that may not be completely accurate, but I feel like it was just, if I had a ding against it, and it's not even against that episode, it's kind of against the show as a whole. It's just that episode is so next level and so well crafted, so inventive, so emotional, so narratively fascinating, so beautifully produced that it almost, in several ways, feels like part of a different show. Like it's not part of the rest of what we've seen. It is, because we're seeing the same actors. We're seeing previous scenes that we've already
recontextualized.
Recontextualized. But it was brilliant, and it was brilliant from concept all the way through execution. Has a tremendous emotional payoff. It was phenomenal. I cannot, for my personal tastes, I don't think maybe the show can be. But I don't think episode 7 of Castle Rock, as you mentioned, called The Queen, with Sissy Spacek in literally every scene. I mean, it is her episodes, cradle to grave. I don't think that episode can be overhyped. It is beautiful, brilliant, staggering. It's wonderful.
Well, I felt like you a little bit in your capacity to just talk to a room. This happens every now and then with TV shows where a particular episode of a run of a series is so above par that you're kind of like, and this happened to me. It was like, is anybody else seeing this? This is, I'm awake. This is amazing. Not as in this show's so stupid, but as in like, I'm present. I am here. Holy cow. You guys have me gripped. And it's unrelenting. It is a fantastic episode. And I do think one of the things we're glancing off of here inadvertently is, any listener to the show for a little while knows my sort of love and hate relationship with the Netflix Marvel shows, but TV in general these days that wants to specialize as the 10-hour movie. I think we have begun for a bit of a time, for a while now, to see the limits of that kind of model. Like you start to strain against the format. Yeah. And episode 8 does this as well, but 7 is the first to really plant a flag in this idea of just like, okay, I get that you want the 10-hour movie in terms of a narrative umbrella, but I need some stops and starts on the path. Else it's just not going to be interesting. You know what I mean? Like, right. I need something to break up so I can feel like I'm getting my time's worth, frankly.
Right. Yeah, of course. I understand.
I'm going to devote this time and energy to a particular piece of art. I want to feel rewarded for that, and not just you're filling out the gaps with atmosphere and mood and nothing else.
Right. Exactly.
Episode 8, once you do watch it, I think you'll really enjoy. It is not the same caliber of 7, but it is different enough that it feels kind of like that as well. It kind of rides some of the coattails of 7 with its energy. So it's pretty fun.
Oh,
so
that's killer.
I mean, Castle Rock, I'm curious to see how it lands. I really don't know what amount of ground they're gonna cover, because there's a lot of suggested stuff going on in the story, which is pretty fascinating. But yeah, very much recommend Castle Rock. Yeah.
Well, I guess if you're good, because boy, I am anxious and excited to get into this episode. So that'll conclude, if it's okay with you, this week's installment of What You Watching, What You Reading, What You Listening to.
This felt like you were doing like I would have to re-listen to what you just did, so maybe do it again in a second.
So would I. I'm not going to do
I know. It felt a little like Whitney Houston, Amy Grant Hard in Motion kind of vibe going on.
Oh,
is
really?
What it felt like. It did.
You tell me I sound like Whitney Houston.
Lackey. I'm taken with the podcast.
Well, I was nice. If that happened, it was purely accidental, because that
I know, but that's where the spirit leads, brother. It's where the spirit leads.
We will follow.
So can I introduce the series? Can I jump us into that? And you
yes, because I have, and we do have one more quick announcement before we get into
do the announcements. Do the business. Do your business, Reed.
I'll tell you what, though.
It is number 2. So.
Wow. So here's what I will say, though. I want you to introduce the series first, because my announcement directly ties into what we're talking about today. So you go ahead and introduce the series.
Cool. Well, guys, we did 101 last week, which was just a looking back. We are looking forward now. We are trying to Empire Strikes Back this thing. And, who knows? We may end up far afield of Empire Strikes Back. We'll see. But in addition to that, it felt fun to capitalize on a bit of the inside jokery that happens here at the Fear of God occasionally, and name a series number 2, which is going to be particularly keyed in on sequel-esque material of what we are covering. So yes, we are starting today with a new series, a new 3-episode series titled Number 2. So here we are, Reed. We're up in it, as it were.
So I will introduce. You've already seen it in your feed, listeners. Most of you may already know because of all the activity going on social media and in the Facebook group and stuff. But coming up, this is an authentic announcement. Coming up next month, I
like how you preface that as though like this. There might be a chance this was just fake news that you're about to share with us.
No, but we joke around a lot. So this one is and through the month of October, we did this last year with hashtag I Love the 90s, and that was very fun and very exciting. We are going to reprise that general format and model, and we are going to have, for the month of October 2018, we are going to have hashtag I Love the 80s.
That's exciting. I love that you said the word reprise. I like you, Reed. Like
I like reprise. You too.
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
So here's how this is going to work, because it's going to be a little bit truncated from what we did last year. Last year we had a month to nominate films. We're going to have to tighten the time frame just a little bit. So you have this week, you have from Tuesday to Tuesday to submit to us through any medium that you see fit. You can email us, fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com.
Smoke signals?
I won't be able to read your smoke signals. You can try it if you want to, but you can comment on Instagram. You can comment on Facebook in the Facebook group, on the Facebook page. You can message us. You can go to Twitter. I would say the simplest and easiest will be through email, fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com, but through any means you want to, nominate up to 10 films. You do not have to rank them. Nominate up to 10 films from the 80s. That means it had to have been released from 1980 to 1989. Nominate your 10 favorite. We're going with favorites. I know there's a lot of debates when we do these kind of things about is it favorite, is it best? We are going for your favorites. So your 10 favorite hashtag I love the 80s movies, horror films from the 80s. So get those into us this week. You'll have to act kind of quickly because we have to truncate the time to get ready for October. So get those into us, and we'll let you know next week how that's all going to unfold. So yeah, I'm super excited for hashtag I love the 80s.
That's going to be fun. And unlike the 90s, I'm curious to see where all this lands because you've alerted me that I probably know more than I realize, and so that may bear out. But it'll be interesting to see where this lands because I really can't. I don't know exactly what all is going to start cropping up in this poll here. So yeah, I love the 80s. Is coming in October. So is Halloween. It is our time of year, foggers. So we are. Let's buckle up and go on that journey together. So Reed, why don't you walk us into where we're at today, okay?
So inarguably, two of the biggest, most iconic figures from horror films of the 80s are none other than Mr. Jason Voorhees and Mr. Freddy Krueger. So what we decided to do, we've not covered, I'm a bit remiss. We made it through 100 episodes. I mean, Michael Myers showed up on episode 10. Okay, but we made it through 100 episodes of a podcast about horror and did not cover material featuring Freddy Krueger or Jason Voorhees until right now. And so we thought it only fitting, rather than try to play catch up with two films, to just use the one where they're both in it.
Just go bigger
at it. Yes, yeah. We're just going to completely decimate everything in its path. What we are talking about today is that beautiful, wonderful, amazing, I'm going to say it with no apologies, that masterpiece.
There it is.
Campy horror
you've learned,
cinema.
Yeah, you've learned you retired that phrase. You only use it when you need it, and apparently you need it.
This needs it, brother. So we are talking about Freddy versus Jason right here on the Fear of God. I
got a question for you, Reed. So, one of the bits that did not make it into episode 101, which I get it. It would have been harder to find all of these nuggets because they were so well-timed little landmines that you just wandered onto. But one thing that didn't make it to 101 was all of the Batman versus Superman, tomfoolery that took place in 2016 and 17. And, I just gotta wonder, it's like, Freddy versus Jason, this came out in what, 02, 03, something like that?
Yeah, I think it was 02.
Do you think Zack Snyder was like sitting around watching Sucker Punch dailies and he was just like, this movie sucks. And then he's like, Freddy versus Jason, his movie, I mean, not Freddy versus Jason. And he was like, Freddy versus Jason, FVJ, and then he just stumbled into it. He was like, Freddy versus Jason. Yeah, that's like in the comics when the characters meet each other and they fight each other. Man, that'd be really awesome. Like Batman versus Superman. It's like, well, Freddy versus Jason, Batman versus BVS, Dawn of Justice. Like, do you think that happened? Like, I want that to be the apocryphal version of how we got such a laborious and mush mouth title of a movie like Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice.
What listeners don't see is how wide you articulated. Like when you were speaking that, your mouth probably got as big as your head. You were like, Batman versus Superman.
It's like marbles in your mouth. It's like, who thought a 6-word title was a smart marketing move?
Like little Martha marbles all in your mouth, just like blah, 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 blah.
Batman versus Superman, Martha. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know. It was fun. It was fun thinking about this movie in relationship to that movie. And who knows which is better? Who knows which is worse? But here we are, brother. We're ready.
Oh,
and
I know which is better. There's no question in my mind which of those two movies
Sure,
is better.
yeah.
But what's funny about you bringing that up is because, so I'm going to quote our beloved benefactor, Mr. Tyler Smith, on this, because he said something that I think perfectly sums up this movie, like sort of in total. He said, because Freddy vs. Jason was the first time that this type of thing had been done since the early days of the Universal Monster movies, where like the Universal Monsters used to do this all the time, where it was like Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, and they would, constantly converge or merge these characters, even if it wasn't in the title. But that hadn't been done for like a very, very long time. But Freddy vs. Jason was kind of the first of its kind to just be like, hey, these are two Titanic icons. We're just going to throw them together in the same film. That's just going to be them. Who would win between these two? But it spawned, the two Alien versus Predator movies came after this. There was also a film that they did. I think you say it, Kyoko versus Sadoko. I'm butchering that, I know, but it's basically but it's basically The Grudge versus The Ring. They did that.
Oh,
and I've seen that film. And what Tyler had said is he had said, here's the deal with Freddy vs. Jason. He said, this is a quote from Tyler Smith. He said, this is the best version of this kind of thing that we could possibly get. He said, Orson Welles himself could not have made Freddy vs. Jason better than the version of Freddy vs. Jason that we actually have. He said, this is kind of like the best.
and it is kind of like your
get.
Rosebud. So,
I don't understand that.
Really?
I mean, I get the reference, but I don't know how it's my Rosebud.
It's like it's your thing. It's your magical totem that
it's my deathbed. On my deathbed, I'm going to say
your mythical Freddy vs. Jason is the mythic Orson Welles Rosebud. Cut this all out. It was. I thought you'd pick up the joke and you just let it.
Well, I know that
you
Rosebud
let it fall like
a
turd, like a number two. Like you
wow, I just didn't get why it was significant to me. So I understand.
You just throw. Sometimes you just throw this stuff against the wall and see if it sticks. Number two. I mean, like it's like that.
Yes, exactly. So, but I know you were watching, so I have a few like prep questions for you.
Please.
So question number one is, because I actually don't know this, how much, if any, of either of these two franchises have you actually seen before?
I don't remember much about it, but I've seen the first Friday the 13th.
Okay.
And I've seen the first Nightmare on Elm Street, and then in high school did see New Nightmare, but I don't really remember New Nightmare. But that's it.
Okay, that's all you've seen.
Yeah,
So you didn't. Oh wow. So if all you've seen of the Friday the 13th,
I did not see Jason
one,
in Space. That passed me by.
That one's awesome. Jason X. That was awesome.
What?
That was fantastic. It's fantastic. No,
this is what we call guilty pleasures.
No, it is. It's so ridiculous. Listen, dude,
I know.
It is so ridiculous. A woman gets her face like freeze dried and then smashed. Like it is ridiculous.
Sweet.
It is
I gotta
so
watch
ridiculous.
That tonight.
There is an android that's like it's awesome. Jason X is crazy stupid. There's one moment where they try to lure him away with, this is in Jason X, where they try to lure him away with like this simulation, and it's just these two naked women standing there going like, let's get drunk and have premarital sex. So he like goes after them. It is stupid inanity, and it's awesome, and I love it, and it's ridiculous. But
wow, all right,
I love this movie so much. So okay, my next.
All right, everybody. Well, I am going to sign off and just let Reed have the rest of this episode.
All right,
we'll see you guys next week with number two, part two.
Because believe me, I could if listeners were remotely interested in me just talking for an hour.
It's quite clear that you could do it.
I could do it. So my next question, so you had not been exposed to very much about it, so I kind of genuinely want to know, and you texted me a few things, so I kind of, I know at least a tip of the hat a bit to where you're going to land on this question. But so my first thing is like thinking as objectively as you can about the concept of this movie. What are your thoughts? Like I'm just about like how they mashed them up, like what the whole root of it was, and then I have one more question, then we'll dive into our general format. But like, yeah.
I mean, I feel like you led the horse to water there, but I'll drink. So yes, I actually thought watching this, and this is what I texted you, that kind of regardless of my mild ambivalence about the movie, it is conceptually sound. I mean, it really does in a way that you kind of going in cynically might not give it proper credit for. Like,
right.
You know, it really, it's silly and it's a bit dumb, but it makes sense. Like, okay, Freddy is banished from the kind of corporeal plane and uses Jason to drum up fear to make Freddy's access more, you know, direct. I mean, so I really thought, conceptually it worked. What is there more to that?
No, that was good. But the third question that I have for you is, I just want to know what you thought of the movie, like just in general.
Well, this is sort of in my likes dislikes, but it kind of functions in this regard too. Like, let's rewind a couple of weeks and pull out ye old Fear of God favorite, Final Destination, and set these two movies against each other. And I want to say to you, Reed Lackey, if Jason versus Freddy is camp, and holy crap, it is camp, Final Destination is still just a garbage movie. It is not camp. Final Destination, like, there is no argument to be, and I've thought about this since Final Destination. I'm like, it is not camp. And then I watched Freddy versus Jason. And I'm like, this is camp.
Specifically, Camp Crystal Lake. It
is camp if camp ever existed in film. This is it. Yes, Camp Crystal Lake, you dummy. And I was like, Final Destination is just people sitting around me like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we named our characters after horror icons? Oh yeah, that's cool. Let's put it in a movie. You know, like it's not camp. It's just a terrible movie. So yes, I think for clearly I'm ashamed at how strong my feelings are about Final Destination.
I was going to say, I was like, I didn't know you
absolutely do not merit the strength of feeling I'm exhibiting.
You and I have had an easy dozen conversations since our Final Destination episode. You were clearly sitting on all of this. Like,
well, it wasn't until I watched Freddy vs. Jason, FVJ. Okay, we're just gonna call it FVJ. You know, it wasn't until I watched LBJ that I was like, no. It wasn't until I watched this that I was like, no, Final Destination is not camp. It is just crap.
Wow,
so yeah, I mean, I
hysterical.
think, as you clearly are able, my friend, if like you can plug in to the wavelength that Freddy vs. Jason puts down, you are in for a treat. It is high camp. It is funny. Like, I didn't know the content of it. And well, I'll say this. So, my wife, who's usually relatively out of the room for some of these movies, I was watching this in our room and on my headphones, but I got like 10 minutes in and she's in the room and she's trying to read on her Kindle. And I'm like, I really have no idea what is going to be in this movie. So I just turned it off. She was like, what are you? I mean, you can watch it if you want to. I was like, nah, that's okay. I'm like, I don't know. Is there going to be, are there going to be a ton of naked people? Is there going to be a couple of, well, right. I know that, but I didn't know it before watching it. And so I was like, of course, it would be the one movie my wife sits in on that she's like, oh, this is why you should have never done that thing. You should have gone into real ministry. You know, like your mom.
Oh,
right? You know?
My gosh. Wow. Wow. I had no idea she was so judgmental.
No, she really isn't. But in my head, I was like, of course, the one she sits in on.
Right. It's not going to be artistic.
Right. It's nothing high-minded whatsoever.
Well, here's one thing. So, okay. Gosh, I'm trying to bridle and structure all of my sort of thoughts about this because clearly I'm like, this is a genuine
masterpiece.
Favorite. It's a favorite movie of mine, and I know objectively speaking that there are several things to ding against it objectively, but just like I just enjoy the heck out of this movie. So so let me back up. Let's camp out on a couple of fun trivioids that I think are
trivioids. Man, yeah. We are in a whole new era. And now Jason X is in space, and we will now chart the trivioids.
I love it. That was on the fly, and I don't know where that came from. But so the film itself, actually, they tried back in the 80s. Hashtag I love the 80s is coming up, everybody. But they tried in the 80s to actually have this mashup, but they were owned by two different properties. And so New Line Cinema, when we eventually do cover one of the Friday the 13th movies or one of the Nightmare on Elm Street films. I'm sure we'll go into this a little bit more, but like New Line Cinema, the production studio, ladies and gentlemen, that gave us like the Lord of the Rings trilogy and everything, is to this day colloquially known as the house that Freddy built, because Nightmare on Elm Street was one of the major sort of initial properties that they took a huge chance on. So they were over here, and then Paramount owned all of the Friday the 13th stuff. So they can never get like the shared profit agreement thing. But then when the time came for the film Jason Goes to Hell, which was supposed to be like the final entry in the Friday the 13th thing, there is a small moment at the very end of that film, because it was released after the film called Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. And at the end of Jason Goes to Hell, Jason's mask is sort of sitting on the ground, and Freddy's glove, in the Jason movie, Freddy's glove rises up and pulls his mask down. And from that, like picture this. It wasn't immediately after, because there was an easy 10 years, I think, to try to get it. But it was, for horror fans, and specifically for horror fans of this franchise, it was in the neighborhood, if not directly, kind of that feeling you get when you see Nick Fury at the end of Iron Man, where it's like, holy crap, they're actually going to go through with this. They're going to put these two into a film together, and when are we going to get that? Now, unfortunately, this had to go through 25 different script versions, and it was in what they call development hell for forever. And so it took them a really, really long time to finally get their act together to actually put this film on screen. And even when they did, there was some small controversy kind of surrounding it, but that was the sort of the origin point of it. They had, again, tried since the 80s. And there was going to be, just, most listeners who know the lore around this probably already know this, there was going to be a sequel that would pit Freddy and Jason up in a rematch, but would also throw into the mix Bruce Campbell as Ash from the Evil Dead series. It was going to be Freddy versus Jason versus Ash. That never materialized for a number of other reasons, just rights and all that other sort of stuff. But yeah, this film, it's so bizarre to me, because this film, they've for instance, Kelly Rowland, I forget how you say her last name. So people try to make her feel bad about being in this movie. They tease her about it, oh, you went from this burgeoning music career to doing Freddy vs. Jason. And she always says the same thing, and this is true. This is how I feel about it too. She was like, listen, that movie was a hit and fans love it. I have nothing to be ashamed about. Fans of those franchises really enjoy it, and it was number one at the box office 3 weekends in a row.
But I mean, she still wouldn't mind being Beyonce.
That was such a perfect response to that. I wouldn't mind.
I know. I mean, it was a good movie and the fans love it. I wouldn't mind being Beyonce, though. I'll be honest.
hashtag I'll be Beyonce.
Right.
But I have one more, just like personal. Well, it's a personal trivioid, and then I want to pivot, and then and then I'll pivot to you for sort of likes, dislikes, as it were. So for me, when I first saw this movie, and this is a little peek behind the curtain, listeners, about Nathan and my personal history. So we moved out to California together. And this film, about that same, about the time frame, we talked about it on The Ring, how we saw The Ring together while we were out here and all this good stuff.
7 days.
Shut up. So then, you had moved back home for a number of reasons. You were starting a family. There was a lot of things going on. So you had moved back home, back east. And this film was kind of on the horizon. It was months away. Simultaneous to that, there were a ton of stresses going on at my job. I was working at this retail store. We had just received a new manager, and she was very over the top. And so there was a lot of things going on. And when this movie was coming out, I was so flooded with frustration, and I was so excited about getting to see Freddy vs. Jason. I walked around and I told people dozens of times, if I said it once, I said, here's what I want. I want a few laughs. I want a few jump scares, I want a very high body count, and I want at least a half-hour fight between the two of them. As long as this movie gives me that, then I am going to be very happy with this movie. And this movie, lockstep, gave me every single thing that I asked for. It was the perfect movie at the perfect time in my life. It was amazing, and I love it. And I'll have more to say about that. But What did you like about it? What did you like about it, Nathan?
I'm sitting this one out, y'all. Before likes, dislikes, I did want to throw my own little trivioid I discovered here, and Brent Wisterink, get your FOG bingo card out, because did you know, Reed, that Evangeline Lilly has a brief walk-on role as a high school student in this movie?
So not only did I know that, I was queued up in my notes to make sure that you had caught it, because I took a photo of it just in case you had not seen it.
Oh, I didn't see it. I just saw the...
Oh, you didn't see it?
No, I didn't see it.
Yeah.
I was reading about it after the fact, and I was like, oh, well, I'm not going to go rewatch it. But I'm glad you got photo proof.
Yeah. So here's where, like, I love you very much. I'm just saying this because, like, I'm proud of myself. So I didn't read that when I caught it. I saw it. Like, so it was one of those moments where I was like, that rarely happens. Like, most of the time you're watching a movie, you genuinely don't pay a lot of attention to the extras. Like,
right.
They set up the cameras.
Background artists, Reed.
The background artist, the featured background artists. So basically.
Featured is actually a different pay scale, so no, background artist is actually more accurate. But regardless, please carry on.
Yeah. Featured, they usually get a line. But so basically, but I was watching this movie and I actually noticed her. I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that she was in this movie. And so then, went and did the research and everything. But yeah, she's very prominent. Like,
really?
I will send you the pictures after this. She is very prominent. She's on for only about like 3 or 4 seconds, but very visible in the frame.
Kind of like me and Shallow Hal, basically.
I think you have more screen time in Shallow Hal than she does in Freddy vs. Jason. But
listeners were just like, wait, what?
Like, what? Nathan's in it? Yes, what? He's in the trailer, everybody. Just go watch it. Yes,
that's
I did.
Back when I went by Jason Alexander.
But did you get did you know the other Lost reference? So I don't know how much research you've done. Do you know the other? Okay, so not only is Kate Austin, did she attend the same high school as all these people, but the role that is played by Jason Ritter, Will, it came inches from being awarded to Ian Somerhalder. And
really?
And the director said that he thought Ian Somerhalder was too good looking.
I was about to say, was he too pretty? That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, and so he was like, it came that close to being awarded to him. But
poor old Ian Somerhalder, man.
I know, can't catch a break for all his attractiveness, and money. I feel bad for him.
Freddy versus Jason. Then in Lost Season 1, he buys him this fat daddy mansion in Hawaii, and then gets offed. Spoiler alert. At the end of Season 1. Yeah, poor guy. Though he did have that other show or whatever it was. Yay, Lost.
Vampire Diaries. But yes.
There you go. Wow.
So I was hoping, and I'm very proud of you, slow clap to Mr. Nathan Rouse, that you caught Kate Austin at the high school. Well, you didn't catch her. You read about it afterwards.
Really slow clap, like one of them.
Yeah, like I'll give you a pop.
For being excited about it. I'll
give you one of these.
That's what that feels like.
There you go.
That was amazing. So likes, dislikes. All right, and yours probably is like a novel length, but
I got 5 pages here. We'll get through it.
Oh my god, I've got like 4 of them. I'll start with a dislike because the rest of them are pretty just fun. So my limited exposure to the Freddy Krueger character when I saw Friday the 13th would have been years ago, and I would not have been as sort of keen to this as I am now. And again, like, you watch a movie like this and you're like, okay, well, how seriously do I take this or not or whatever? But like, I was unprepared for just how like misogynistic the character is. And, even
Freddy.
Yeah. Even knowing like, okay, the roots of the character and the pedophilia and all that sort of stuff, which is terrible and awful and no good and very bad. But I just, for what could be just pure fun, those moments stuck out to me as like, oh, I feel icky with that
feel a little slimy. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was just off the top there, but these are really dialed in sort of moments that I wrote down as likes. I love like,
oh boy,
I was about to make an off.
You just stop.
I was about to make a comment here, but I'll save that one. I love the after sex candle handoff. As though it is just their weird routine. It is it's definitely random. Like when that happened, I was like, wow, They must have candles out for sex time all the time, because the amount of non-speaking that just happened of her just to like look up and him be like, here's the candle. Like, it was just this really funny moment to me.
Wow.
I know it's very specific, but it was really funny to me that happened. My next on my likes list, and then I'll let you do a few, is a line, and, you know, feel free to bleep me here, but, one of my favorite lines in this movie is just, my best friend was just killed, Dad. So how about giving me some space? I just love this dude just lashes out at his dad, and he's like, "It's just killed." That's the moment I was like, okay, this movie is total and complete camp, top to bottom.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
This dude just like railing at his father and cutting him out. It was just really funny to me.
Did you have any more?
I do, but
Please?
you've probably got like a plethora of pinatas, and I want you to be able to talk some, so that.
I'll talk.
I know that. At the minute I said talk some, I was like, I don't have to give you that permission ever, but much less today.
I do love sincerely, and this is part of why I think the movie is so successful, and why I think it is far superior, and yes, I said far superior, to films like it, like the Alien vs. Predator franchise and like that Grudge vs. Ring film, is because there is a really strong balance and blend between the focal points of the two titans in the film. Like, they both get a lot of not only just screen time, but like you see in the same way. See, I keep going back to this because and I actually didn't expect to do this, but like, you remember how we would make comments about the first Avengers movie, and it's like, oh yeah, all the little pair-ups or mash-up moments that you kind of want to see, a lot of them are there. You know, like, oh, you want to see Thor fight Hulk, and you want to see this sort of pairing off and stuff like that. Well, in that same vein, you know, like, yeah, you want to see Jason's shadow falling on Elm Street. You want to see Freddy rising up out of Camp Crystal Lake. You know, it's like, those are the things that you want to see, and it's all in here. You spend time in Freddy's nightmare world, especially that boiler room that was so iconic in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. So you spend time in there. You spend time at Camp Crystal Lake. They have this really good blend between the two. The one glaring exception to that, and this is not a ding, it's just I found it an interesting observation, is that through the entire course of the movie, Freddy only actually claims one victim, and that's the friend, Will's friend. That's the only person through the run of this film that Freddy actually claims. All of the other ones are technically killed by Jason. So I just thought that was interesting. Like Jason has this.
Well, let me ask
there's
you
a massive body count.
I'm sort of hesitant to ask this, and so I'm going to encourage some boundaries here, time wise, because I know the thematic richness of this movie. You're probably going to have a lot to say there. What listeners don't know is Reed just took a sip of drink right before I said that. He's really having to work to not spit it out. That's awesome. Oh my God. I guess a question that maybe is pretty self-evident, but like, tonally, this, as we've clearly established, this is very campy, but the lineage of these films did not originate in that tone, right? I mean,
neither one at all.
Right.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
right.
Are there clear lines? And there, again, I know I'm asking what could be a 2-hour question here, but Are there clear turns in the franchises where a pivot starts to happen or jarringly happens from more kind of quote unquote scary to campy?
I would not necessarily call it jarring. I would say that for the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, the turn starts to happen about part 4, where, well, really its origins go to part 3, but part 3 is awesome. Nightmare on Elm Street 3 is one of my favorites in the entire franchise. It rivals the first one in terms of just pure enjoyment for me. But in the third film, Freddy does make a lot more wisecracks, and he starts getting sort of like jokey with his victims. That was new to that film. And then they just sort of upped the ante as that continued, to the degree that like Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare is I mean, there's a portion at which Freddy jumps into a video game and you have to wear 3D glasses, and like it's ridiculous. Yeah, it's super ridiculous.
But New Nightmare is pretty straightforward, right?
Because Craven was very frustrated and very vocally frustrated that the franchise had taken that turn. And so when he stepped back, and had nothing to do with any of the sequels, and so when he stepped back in to do to do New Nightmare, he tried very intentionally to bring it back to that tone of the original one, where it was like, no, Freddy's not this jokester. He's a malevolent, entity. And so we need to return to that. And in ways that, when we hopefully eventually do a New Nightmare episode, we can get into at that point. New Nightmare is very meta, and it's sort of a self-commentary, not only on that franchise, but how people received that franchise and all of those other kinds of things. Now, the Friday the 13th movies, the first 3 to 5 feel very earnest, particularly the first one, but they feel very sincere. For me specifically, and again, I love this one. This is arguably my favorite in the franchise. Part 6, Jason Lives, is where it does get like overtly very campy. Not that there was no camp before then, because there's Camp Crystal Lake's been in all of them, but you know what I mean.
Okay.
That it's like they get steadily more and more outrageous to the degree that like by the time you get to Jason X, it's just they've leaned heavy and hard into it.
And again, contextualizing some of this for your co-host here, were you surprised in the Monster Mash, the Fear of God Monster Mash TM, that Jason progressed as far as he did and Freddy did not? Did that? I'm not at all surprised. Oh, really?
In fact, I expected it. So something that it's not really a moment of theme, so I can express it here. I've thought a lot about this specific element of it. Jason is unique to several other of his peer slashers in that he is arguably a genuinely sympathetic monster.
Sure.
He is in the vein of your Carrie Whites and your Frankenstein monster in that, yes, he slaughters a massive amount of people, but his origin story is rooted in this generally benign child who had physical deformity and so therefore was oppressed, for most of his childhood, and then through outright criminal neglect it drowns while on the watch of these campers. And so his story is very sympathetic. They allude to elements of it in Freddy vs. Jason, but his authentic lore is genuinely quite sympathetic. And so he takes on and I think, for my take on it, and I would love to hear listeners' thoughts on it too, I think part of why Jason resonates so much more as like this sort of slasher icon is because he becomes and sort of embodies this vengeful spirit, as opposed to, as you've already pointed out, Freddy is very sadistic, very misogynistic, very cruel. He spent his life as a pedophile killer, and then haunts their dreams. Like, he is monstrous. He is, and in some ways there are parallels to, again, going back to Universal, there are parallels to like the Dracula versus the Frankenstein's monster, where it's like both are monsters, but Dracula is like this intentionally malevolent, predatory evil, whereas Frankenstein's monster just sort of didn't ask for any of this, but has now got it. And so yeah, it honestly didn't surprise me that Jason and in the Monster Mash, like, he trounced all of his competition. The only competitor that gave him like a tight race was Michael Myers, which also doesn't surprise me. But Jason, like, absolutely was the clear champion of the slashers. And again, I find that to be because I think there is quite a bit of sympathy to his lore and to his personhood, even though, ironically, he kills massive amounts of people.
Sure.
But yeah.
I've got 2 other on my likes list. How many do you have, and do you want to intersperse, or what do you want to do?
No, you go ahead and finish yours, because I may, more may pop up. I don't necessarily have any other specifics that I needed to name.
I wrote down the line, that goalie was pissed about something. I just loved the potheads, sort of response after the rave massacre.
Yes.
Reading the Facebook group, it looks like this is an homage. I would not have known that, but I really, despite its largely campy nature, during the final fight, the shot of Freddy leaping out of the water against the red backdrop was pretty. That was pretty badass. It's such a great shot. Yeah. So
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say is like that. That's kind of wraps up my likes dislikes list. Is just I was really impressed. I was like, okay, that's cool.
Well, and I will make a comment on that like, I mean, not every single frame, but there are dozens of individual shots in this that are really well crafted and well framed. It is an alarmingly, like, and so when I say this, I'm not putting it in the same camp of like a Roger Deakins or these, great titans of cinema or anything. But in terms of just
let's not get crazy. Like
no. Well, I wouldn't dare.
I'm kidding.
But in terms of just a genuinely, objectively well-crafted image. Again, I said Jason's shadow falling on Elm Street. Like that's a great shot. That's a really it's a wonderful shot. There's some other shots in the film just of your particular monster of note, really just standing in a rather iconic pose, and I love a lot of how it's framed and a lot of how it's shot that I think is really rooted in an understanding of what fans of this franchise were going to be after or what they were going to want to see from it. I have I said I didn't write any down, but 3 sort of came to me, and I'm going to ding it a little bit. One, it's not really a dislike for me because of the campy nature of the film, but there is exactly, and I like some of these actors. I actually have seen some other work that they've done and appreciate some of them, but there is exactly one objectively good performance in this film. Actually, 1.5. I was going to say just Robert Englund. Robert Englund is like, he's fantastic in this film, but he's also had the luxury of playing Freddy 7 times before. So he was able to sort of like fit into that role. The other one that I'll give just some sort of quasi-legitimacy props to is the actor, and gosh, his character name escapes me right now. The actor's name is Christopher Marquette. He's the one who is kind of a nerdy guy. He joins along with them, and then he's the one that has kind of the saddest death of them, if you will, where he's like he just sort of gets hurt. Again, a little personal trivioid. I used to date his cousin about the time this movie came out. About the time this movie came out. Like there was a couple of times that we hung out. He's a really nice guy. It's so funny. He's the only person from this film that I've actually.
I love that you're like that actor. I can't remember his name. I dated his cousin. He's a nice guy. I don't know his name though.
No. Christopher Marquette is the actor's name. Okay, I don't know the character's name.
Oh, no, right. Yeah.
So, but I don't remember his character.
I'm like Dory. Just ignore everything I say.
But no, like I think he brings, for what small role he has, I think he brings some legitimacy to it. But my overall comment is that even from some actors that I know are talented, like these are bad performances. These are really ridiculous, bad performances. Even from like Jason Ritter, who I adore, and Catherine Isabel, who I think does some great work in some of her other, independent horror flicks. But the acting in this is pretty unilaterally terrible. But I don't know even where to begin with the bong offering Freddy slugworm. I don't even know where to begin with that.
That was pretty wild.
That entire thing. I just have no idea. Like, I don't know if I like it. I don't know if I'm grossed out by it. I don't know how I feel about it. It's just so
wonder
weird.
if, you and I were in one of our more toked out modes, like, like in The Purge, just smoking a bowl. And watching Freddy versus
the
Jason.
Real criminals of the Purge.
Right. The real monsters of the Purge. I wonder if we would have enjoyed that aspect a little more. Who knows? Who can say? Who can say?
Exactly.
But it is weird as hell. Yes.
Oh my gosh, it is such a strange, bizarre moment. So yeah, but I mean, like, obviously overall this film, delivers on a lot of the things that I really enjoy about these characters and this franchise overall. So yeah, I mean, like, I'm almost reluctant to ask this question because I think both of our lists are probably going to be blank, but do you have any scares?
I've got some things written down.
Oh, yeah. Awesome.
I mean, like,
right, well, hit me with it.
I mean, some of them is more just kind of jump moments, but I'll say things like the missing kids photo and the dreamscape turning to her.
Oh,
like,
yes.
That was pretty creepy. That was effective.
That whole dream sequence is pretty well executed.
I mean, it's silly and stupid and campy, but I just didn't know it was going to happen. So Dad's severed head made me jump. Like I was like,
yes.
God.
Yeah.
That's disgusting.
Yeah, of course. That's awful.
And then also not knowing the backstory of Jason, the creepy baby Jason, that was pretty creepy. That was gross.
Oh, yes.
Disturbing. Yeah. So that's about it. That's all I got.
I don't have any. There are a couple of like quality jump scares in this, but there's not like, it's not a scary film. It's not even really trying to be. But yeah, I mean, like, I feel like this is what I was going to say. And I said this on the Facebook group. I'm going to say it right here. I'm going to go on record. That final half hour mashup between Freddy and Jason is just gory hallelujah. Like that is one of the it's some of the grossest, sickest, most disgusting. Like they're just bathing in blood and violence. Like it is almost to a degree where it's like, this is so over the top. I can't even process what I'm watching. It is so gross and disgusting. But it is, yeah. I mean, you almost have to slow clap like their sheer commitment to how much blood they're going to drench these two people in, which I think is appropriate.
I mean, you know, it got you both in print and in verbal to say the phrase "gory, gory, hallelujah" with no irony whatsoever. So they're either doing something really right or something terribly wrong. So, you know,
I can't take credit for that. I first heard that on Ash vs. Evil Dead, but there it is. One more thing before we get to this. I meant to mention this in my likes. Love this. This will come up again in themes. Love that. So we talked already about how there's a good balance between the villains, the monsters, as it were. But Jason is sitting there. He's just after the kids or whatever. He's just sort of a killing machine. So he's just killing. But then the moment when she rips Freddy out into the real world,
that's pretty cool.
And Freddy realizes what's happened. Like for me, it's a real credit to Robert Englund's ability to perform because he's under a ton of makeup. So all of that expressiveness that you see, like that's really high quality for him. So his expressiveness of like, oh crap, like what did I just step into? And then, you know, sort of the prelude to the final battle that they step into. I genuinely love that moment. I think that moment is so fantastic. So I just couldn't get too much further down the road without mentioning it.
Yeah, you did. You know?
Well, okay. So in what I'm about to express, listeners are either going to be impressed or they're going to roll their eyes for like the next 20 minutes.
I'm ready. I'm ready to feel maybe both of those things.
But I've seen this film a number of times now. I've probably seen it about a dozen or more times now because there was a season where I would just have it on in the background, just like it would just be the thing you watched when you didn't have anything else to watch. But there's a legitimate, I think, in a serious way, this is campy. This is a campy film with campy intentions, but in a very serious sort of framework, not grave, but authentic, there's a conversation to be had about when a person, well, let me set up the premise. We've, I think, alluded to it, but I don't think we've ever actually said it. And if we have listeners who have not seen this film and because of its campy nature or because of its gore just have no interest in seeing it. So the premise behind this is that Freddy, who had terrorized Elm Street and the inhabitants of Springwood for all of these years, he has been forgotten. And because he has been forgotten, he has lost his power. He has no power. He even says in the opening sort of prologue of the film, he said, I can't come back if nobody remembers me. I can't come back if they're not afraid. And so he says, in the beginning, he says, but I found someone. I found someone who'll make them remember. And so he unleashes Jason to basically cause people to be afraid again and gain some power, and then he can come back and do his thing. Then he can do what he wants to do. And in the film, about the halfway mark, somewhere about the halfway mark, it takes a turn, and what sets up the versus element of Freddy versus Jason is that Freddy released Jason, but then Jason just wouldn't stop killing. So Freddy's basically like, no, this victim was mine. Like you keep, as I mentioned earlier, Freddy only kills one person in the film. Everybody else is killed by Jason. And so Freddy can't claim his victims, and so he's got to make Jason stop, and that's what sets up the final battle. And spoiler alert for people who haven't seen it and don't care to, Jason ultimately wins. So Freddy is ultimately, I put in air quotes, destroyed, because he even winks at the camera at the very, very end with his severed head. But Jason is, sort of the definitive winner of this little mashup. And I think there's some authentic consideration worth having about those who would, for the sake of power or control or influence or their own personal pleasure or whatever, utilize fear tactics, sort of unleash a scare monster, as it were, sort of implement, let's make them afraid. Let's make them afraid. Now, Freddy's purposes are so that he can gain power and control and authority, but for whatever the purposes or the ends are, let's make them afraid so they'll be submissive. Let's make them afraid so they'll do what we ask them to do. Let's make them afraid so they'll pass the law. Let's make them afraid so they'll sit down and shut up. Let's make them afraid, make them afraid, make them afraid. And then in this film, the source of what he thought he could control and what he thought he could manipulate is unleashed, and then it gets away from him. And eventually, when it gets away from him to such a degree that it ultimately becomes his own individual undoing. And for a movie as absurdly and ridiculously campy as Freddy vs. Jason is, I find that very interesting. I find the fact that that's like the root of the narrative, that's very interesting. This sort of baseline, hey, I released it so to benefit me, and then it got away from me. It got out of hand. And you see all kinds of things. For me, personally, I can see tons of parallels to this idea of like, okay, well, we need to be cautious of that. Okay, so let me get it away from people for a second. I'm not going to give my opinion or criticize anybody for their opinions with this, but a dynamic happens of like, okay, be afraid of medication and vaccines. Be afraid of that because it's going to cause all of these other things. And it starts this sort of wage war about like, okay, be afraid because Big Pharma's introducing all of these things inside your vaccination. And then pretty soon there's this real conversation that begins to rise up about like, well, hey, now so many people are not getting vaccinated. Is that going to cause these sort of debunked and dead diseases to suddenly arise again? Are they going to come back? Again, I'm not making, I'm not a trigger warner, not wanting any major trigger warnings or whatever. But then it's like, well, okay, we need to be afraid of the terrorists. We need to be afraid of this condition. We need to be afraid of the Democrats. We need to be afraid of the Republicans. We need to be afraid. And it's like, then you foster so much fear that pretty soon the monster gets away from you. And then the monster, when it turns its head and turns against you, you realize to your peril that you can't control it, that you can't manipulate it, that fear just gets away from you. I just find it interesting. I just find it fascinating.
Well, to piggyback on that, and actually what I think the real world does more scarily than the Freddy versus Jason world is what I think tends to happen more often than not. And the analogy, the parallel you're trying to draw is that unleashing that sort of terror, that sort of fear factor into the wild, and it starts to rampage, then the source point has to, because we as humans are so terrible at owning our error, then what happens is that source point that released said fear factor starts to steel itself even more to support the work that this fear factor is doing in the world.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes,
like,
yes. Of course. Yeah.
Like it starts in a world, in a way that you're like, no, really, this is terrible. Like any sane, rational person would think this is terrible. And yet the source point, and I know people are like, you're talking about Donald Trump. I'm really not. Like, I'm just thinking about sort of analogies in the world of like, whether it's a personal relationship or whatever, now you have to fortify the lie, as it were, to keep your own sort of, to save face, really.
Right.
Like
absolutely.
You unleash this sort of lie out into the wild to sort of, either for cruelty or for just cruel amusement. Well, then it backfires on you, and now you have to sort of keep.
And now,
I can definitely see that.
The parallel that I have is an episode of television that I am not convinced exists. I'll tell this story in just a second. But there is this notion of like, I don't want to say self-fulfilling prophecy, but once in your observation that the monster sort of is unleashed and now is rampaging and is out of control, and then it retroactively justifies the fear that you fabricated.
Sure.
It retroactively. So it's like, yeah, see, we have reason. Okay. I don't know enough details about the story to speak concretely about it, but that poor teenager, I believe she was, who was killed, and then. Again, I don't know enough details to speak concretely about it, but from what I understand, she was killed by an undocumented immigrant. And so what that then, and I remember when that piece of information came to light, and again, I should have done more research if I was going to reference it, but when that piece of information came to light, I remember one of the first thoughts that I had was, this is now going to be ammunition for each and every individual who is scared of anybody who fits that description, whether or not they're to blame for it. scared. I did not mean to. But anybody who's afraid of, I think that's what it was, is afraid and scared.
Yes.
But anybody who's afraid of that sort of thing is now going to have at least one that they can point to and say, like, well, what about this? Well, what about this? And it does. It's like if you make someone scared enough of it. I vaguely and probably made listeners scratch their head when I reference this. I'm going to keep it very brief, but can I tell you a weird story that I don't think I've ever told you?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm going to tell it right now.
For.
So I have a memory, a very distinct memory, of watching an episode of what I thought was Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And in this episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, there's a girl who is trying to boost her popularity in her school, in her high school. She's a bit, she's wears glasses and she's kind of a nerd and she's a bit frumpy, and so she's not popular, and she's trying to boost her popularity. So what she does is she actually kills the, your head cheerleader, your, sort of most popular girl. She kills her and claims to the rest of the school that they were both attacked by a man in a ski mask and white gloves. So she claims that they were both attacked by it. This poor, popular girl was killed and that she survived. It works. Her popularity is gained. She begins to become, very prominent in the school, and a lot of sympathy, and she gains friends, and and all of these sort of things happen. And at the end of this sort of half-hour episode, she's staring down into this body of water, like this lake, and she's looking down. And as she's looking down, suddenly into the frame, this figure in a black ski mask and white gloves emerges, and she sees it in the reflection, and so suddenly she becomes the victim of this, black ski masked killer, and then that's how the episode ends. Nathan Rouse, for
I feel like I'm in trouble.
No, for maybe 20 years of my life, I have combed this vast, beautiful landscape that is the internet, and I will beg listeners, I will beg and plead with listeners, if what I just told you rings any bell to you at all, please let me know what it is or where it comes from, because Nathan, I can't find it. I remember watching the episode. I can still visually and vividly remember that episode of television, but I can't find it anywhere. I've combed all of the
reminds
episodes.
me of?
What?
That episode of X-Files. Where from this past season, where remember the one I'm talking about?
Yes.
Where
where it's like they just erased it. All these things you think you remember, they just erased it. Well, maybe that's what happened to me. Maybe the truth is out there. But I'm being sincere, and then I'll loop it back in.
It's like the Sinbad movie Kazam.
Yes, maybe I stepped into like some sort of
There's a name for this. Dadgummit.
The Mandela effect.
Yeah. Or the Menendez effect.
No, the Mandela effect.
I know.
Wow. You jerk. But sincerely, listeners, if that plot line rings a bell to you, please let me know where I might have seen it, because I think I must have dreamed the whole thing. But in this notion,
quick to the typewriter.
But hopping off of that, there is this notion of like, when we fabricate monsters, we can possibly tend to give life to monsters.
Sure.
We can and that being my not trying to be glib or cynical or dismissive point is that yes, you start verbalizing monsters and you're going to give them life, you're going to give them power. In the same way that Freddy was going to use Jason to bolster his own power by getting people to start talking about Freddy again. This is like multi-layer thing. Freddy was going to try to get people thinking about him again so that he could gain power, and then the force he used to do that, eventually became his own undoing. And I feel like again, this whole episode can be campy, and we don't have to get super vulnerable or emotional or serious here right now. I don't think that's kind of in the cards for this episode. But honestly,
I'm ready to go there.
Let's do it. I'm gonna cry. No, that like I do think that we must be cautious about our fear mongering. Let me just leave it at that. We must be cautious about our fear mongering. That when we speak and when we give life and foster terror in the world, that we must be cautious about how we're giving that power, if nowhere else, in our own hearts and minds. How we're giving that sort of thing, maybe completely illegitimate power, maybe power that is not warranted or earned and that it would not otherwise have. But when we fearmonger, that's exactly what happens. The more people you hear say, be afraid of that race of people, or be afraid of that religion, or be afraid of that political ideology, the more people you hear say, be afraid, be afraid, be afraid, you give power to that. And pretty soon that power that you've given to this other thing is going to get away from you, and might ultimately, the thing that would have otherwise been maybe an opportunity for cooperation or reconciliation or neighborliness, it's going to get away from you. It's going to slip right through your fingers because of how much you've fostered the fear of it. And I mean, that's basically my point. I think I've said my piece about it. But do you have any thoughts, any sort of response to that, or is that?
No, I mean, I think there's a lot of validity to what you're saying, in the sense that, like, and I may be trying to, we are maybe in an ankle deep stream, and I'm starting to walk towards a raging river. And so I don't want to totally do that. But, I think a lot about, in this context, the notion of like gun ownership, just personally, and sincerely not interested in that giant conversation, other than to say, like, other than the sort of spiritual and moral applications I might apply to that, I think one basic tenet for me is like, well, I think I don't want to feed the beast. I don't want to. Right. And hear me, like, that may sound indicting to someone who is into that kind of stuff. And I don't mean that too, other than to simply say that's part of the reason why. Is it's like, I think there is something to be said for people of faith maintaining a certain degree of conscientiousness and compassion towards the world, even when the world itself is raging. Our and like, I'm not even claiming that that's like a simple thing. I don't want to be glib there, but our call isn't to participate in the flailing, as it were. Right. Because all that's going to do is exacerbate what already exists. Anyway, sure. I think that's effectively kind of what you're scratching at. But yeah, I think that's, I could, for a movie that's shallow as all get out, I don't think you're too far off base, Reed.
Why? Thank you very much.
I'm glad the flannel graph at Camp Crystal Lake taught you something, and you were able to have a nice, lovely takeaway.
Oh my gosh! Well, let me before we bring in our good old friend, let me mention just briefly a scripture verse that I had pulled up and thought about with this. It's not a one-for-one parallel, but it made me think of basically what's going on in Freddy vs. Jason. Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 8 simply says, "He who sows injustice will reap disaster, and the rod of his fury will be destroyed." Again, getting to this idea of you foster these sort of unjust, what I would equate, that the scriptures don't say, but I would equate to this sort of fear-mongering and fear proselytizing. You foster that, and you will reap in kind. You will reap that same sort of thing. And as the scripture puts it, that your weapon, what it calls the rod of fury, will be destroyed. Like it's gonna devolve against you. So yeah, do you want to go ahead and bring in our old friend David S. Pumpkins?
Let's do it. We got to figure out who we're going to pit David S. Pumpkins against for our DSPV WWWRWL. Wow.
All the letters.
Yes,
all the initials.
So David S. Pumpkins for Freddy versus Jason. Reed. Style, scares, substance, my friend. We're at 102 episodes. Listeners can easily find what these all mean. For style, I feel like I don't even have to ask. Just throw it out there, Reed.
For me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I might surprise you here. My brief answer is, if I were rating style on my enjoyment of the film, I would give it a 5. If I were rating my style on like the objective qualities, I would probably give it a 3, because I think there's things to praise. But yes, it's at best probably a 3-star movie objectively. So I'm in a mid-range, and my style is a 4. I'm resisting giving it a 5 because I don't think that's
you
quite
don't have to
right
resist.
Just
embrace
This is a mother
The
effing
beast.
5.
Embrace
the style
the
is
beast.
5.
This doesn't have to be a Reed versus Lackey moment. You can be a whole person. That
is hilarious.
And give your 5. Because I will probably land at a 2.5.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very ambivalent. I would not categorize it as a dislike. I would not categorize it as a like. So a 2.5
Understood.
right in the middle seems right. For scares, I would probably also land at a 2.5. Like I jumped a couple of times. It is gory and gross. It is not dreadful whatsoever. But I did jump a few times and that's kind of what you get.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm actually going to land on a 3 for scares because exactly that. It's like some of the entries in these franchises are genuinely scary, but this one just leans way too heavy into the camp. You're going to jump a couple of times if it's your first time seeing it, but other than that, yeah, it's not really very scary. Now, for substance, I just think I have to try to be fair here. I don't think that, like we have done so many times before, that I just invented what we talked about for thematic substance. I think it's there, it's baked into the narrative, but at the same time, I mean, it's Freddy versus Jason, so there's not a ton of substance here. So I'm going to land on a 3 for substance.
Well, I value consistency. I think a long obedience in the same direction, and I'm going to land at a 2.5 on substance. It's pretty paper thin, but I'll give you some credit for pulling something out of this. This old number 2,
Our David S. Pumpkins measurement, we give it 6 out of 10. We give Freddy vs. Jason 6 out of 10.
That sounds
David S.
right.
Pumpkins.
That sounds right.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of.
Are you disappointed?
Right.
I'm worried you're
No.
disappointed. Okay, all right.
No, because here's the.
Are you going to leap out of the screen at me and hover in midair, this awesome backdrop and rock and roll music, and be like, beat me up?
Not this moment. No.
Size-wise, you and I could be a Jason and Freddy. Size-wise,
that's possibly
that'd
true.
be wild.
That's possibly true. So parting shots across the bow. The Robert Englund, obviously iconic Freddy actor, but the popular Jason actor is a man named Kane Hodder, and fans were actually genuinely very upset that Kane Hodder wasn't asked back for this film, and the reason that he wasn't is because he actually the director wanted somebody much taller, which is actually, I mean, he's 6'2", but the director wanted somebody who was more in the like 6'5", 6'6" range, and so because he wanted that visual, so that's why he wasn't. So did you know that not only was Rob Zombie offered to direct this film, which what a different film that would have been. You've never seen a Rob Zombie film, have you? Oh, no. Man, it would have been dramatically different if he had accepted the directing. But Rob Zombie was offered to direct this. You know who else was? Peter Jackson.
Really?
Peter Jackson was offered to do, because remember, New Line had worked with him before on Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
He was offered Freddy vs. Jason. Turned it down, obviously. But yeah, can you imagine what a Peter Jackson Freddy vs. Jason would have been for the man to have on his filmography the Lord of the Rings films and Freddy vs. Jason?
He's got, what is that one movie, Beautiful Somethings? What's the...
Oh, Beautiful Creatures?
Apparently
Heavenly Creatures. Heavenly Creatures.
One of his early films, I haven't seen it, is apparently pretty jacked up. So I think
there's an early film called Bad Taste that is really gross.
Yeah, I think our Lord of the Rings affection blinds us to his, kind of darker catalog. So it may not be as off point as we may think,
Understood. So, no, for me, I think this is a legitimately a quality entry for these respective franchises. I think it's a perfect extension of where the franchises eventually went. Obviously not with the same tone as their originals, but...
Well, we could do a series mashup of number 2 and TV guideposts. It's like...
Oh,
you read the guideposts while you're going number 2, I mean, like, on that note, guys, next week we are going to be talking about Creep 2,
dun, dun, dun.
The sequel to Creep, if you weren't sure. Guys,
available on Netflix. Find it.
Thank you so much for coming out. Yes, it is available on Netflix. Reed, good to see you, brother. Good to chat with you about Freddy versus Jason. We'll take a quick potty break and come back next week for number 2, part 2. See you guys.
Bye. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And you can continue the conversation in a variety of ways. You can follow us on Twitter @TheFearOfGod. You can like and follow us on Facebook or join the Facebook Fear of God discussion group. You can follow us on Instagram @Fear of God Podcast. Go to morethanonelesson.com for show notes or to leave a comment on this post or any of the other official episode posts. Email us at fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. And last but not least, if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating or review. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.